Is your organization too hot, too cold, or just right? Attracting and retaining talent in a post-pandemic world. As if anti-vax and anti-mask haven't been enough, over the past few months employees have had to start navigating anti-progress, anti-empathy, and just plain anti-reason. Depending on your country, company and type of work, you may have worked remotely just fine for anything from a year to 2 years now. Yet, in a turn of events that has really been no surprise to anyone, the dusty, crusty, musty pale male brigade decided to throw away the keys to their DeLoreans because no one will be going back to the future on their watch. The resistance to embracing remote work as the new normal has been most pronounced in industries where showing up to work in anything other than a suit and tie is tantamount to treason, but even supposed champions of innovation such as Mac Daddy Tim Cook, and whoever runs Microsoft now has been reported saying, "New rules, who dis?" I mean the level of caudacity you must possess to spew diluted nonsense like, "I do think for a business like ours, which is an innovative, collaborative apprenticeship culture, this is not ideal for us." And it's not a new normal, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, OMGEW David. Can a statistically inclined person please examine the possible causal relationship between delusion and cash money? I think that's why I'm poor and these men have racks on racks. Look, I'm not naive. I know there are other factors at play like possible commercial property crashes and the fact that not all jobs can be done remotely, but let's not kid ourselves into thinking this tug-of-war is anything but a symptom of the fear of losing control over your workforce, #capitalism. So no crocodile tears and your top talent exits stage left en masse, because the verdict is in and your signature dusty, crusty, mustiness are literally creating talent risks. Now y'all know I'm not one to throw shade and not give advice. Yeah, I know, I'm a friggin' saint. Also, the remote work, hybrid work, and new normal debates are very prominent right now, but if organizations want to attract and retain top talent post-pandemic they need to pay attention to more than just working arrangements. However, an important facet of organizational life can in fact be gleaned from the main boardroom's response to the debate, namely that of organizational culture. An organization's culture is central to attracting talent and convincing them to stay, especially during times of great disruption. So let's get into it, shall we? The notion of attracting and retaining top talent by presenting an appealing organizational culture has been around for many years. Organizational culture has been found to be directly related to whether employees join, remain with and also leave organizations. Organizations wishing to attract and retain skilled and experienced employees develop strategic statements called the Employer Value Proposition, or EVP, which defines how a company wants to be perceived by its employees. If done right, these statements represent organizational members' deeply held beliefs and assumptions, are operationalized into policy and practices which, collectively, represent a distinct organizational culture. See, now the thing is, these value-proposing statements are assumed to represent the underlying values of the organization and by extension the values of its leadership. However, I have observed firsthand how represented values have been entirely abandoned, with senior leadership citing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic as the reason. Notice how I use the qualifier, represented? That is very much intentional shade. The values that direct behavior, and I mean the real values that are often unconscious and difficult to identify, may develop and evolve over time, but for the most part they remain constant across contexts and situations and would thus not be so easily abandoned, even in a crisis situation. Basically, what COVID-19 has done here is stumble into the prison yard of superficial organizational cultures that have held talented individuals captive and shivved the guard. The true values that direct behavior and decisions have been exposed, and I predict that for a very long time after the world has recovered from this pandemic, prospective talent will deduce an organization's culture from the decisions being made now, as opposed to simply accepting EVPs and presented organizational values at face value, as has been the case to date. This is because many organizations' response to COVID-19 has shown that organizational culture is about more than fitting in. It has become a matter of self-preservation. How an organization is managing the effects of the pandemic is not an indication to prospective employees about how they will feel in its employ, but rather if they will survive it. Since this is pure speculation and based solely on my personal observations, I went all in and likened organizational culture to the temperature of the porridge in the fairy tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One bowl was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. That said, I did attempt to give my opinion some semblance of credibility by structuring my porridge analogy according to existing theoretical models of organizational culture and employee archetypes. For each inferred culture, whether it be one that is too hot, too cold, or just right, I predict what type of employee it might attract. Specifically, the porridge analogy attempts to marry three different yet structurally similar models to studying organizational culture with a model of classifying employee archetypes. These models are the competing values framework, the 8 styles of company culture, the company culture matrix, and the 9 archetypes of employee engagement. From these models, I've extracted and merged key dimensions, namely stability, focus, interaction, trust, and rules. In a table in the original post, I present anecdotal evidence of an array of organizational responses I have observed during the COVID-19 pandemic, which I believe to be true reflections of organizations' respective cultures. Depending on the nature of organizational responses, I have clustered them according to the perceptions dimension of the engagement archetype framework. This implies the expectation that organizational responses to the pandemic result in prospective talents' perceptions, much like one would expect the EVP to elicit certain perceptions, albeit less deliberate in this instance. Furthermore, it is assumed that the observed organizational decisions are the result of a particular cultural structure which I have attempted to map according to the dimensions in the aforementioned models. When scanning through some of these listed observed responses, 'cause I know you ain't gonna read all of it, keep in mind that all of these responses were observed among organizations that present itself as being people-focused, socially conscious, and generally progressive. This initial exploration appears to suggest that an organizational culture that is just right for attracting desirable perceptions and behaviors among prospective talent should be 1. High in stability. 2. Have an external focus. 3. Have high interdependence among employees. 4. Have high levels of trust across reporting lines, and 5. Have well-established rules. Furthermore, these structures for producing organizational culture need to be rooted in authentically held values among key decision-makers or risk collapsing during times of crisis if merely implemented superficially. Lastly, to reiterate, this is not an empirical piece of research and is not intended to be used as such. Here I have simply presented my opinion on what I have been observing during this time of great social and organizational disruption. I hope that sharing my thoughts might also encourage others to think critically about how we can approach post-pandemic organizational culture in a way that is less dusty, crusty, and musty. Thank you for reading. If you want to take action on this matter, try out our organizational culture audit tool to see if there are ways in which you can improve your organization's culture.